Chapter 4 The Bizarre Intruder. It was shortly thereafter that Holmes departed the premises. He stated that there was some investigations regarding our adventure of the previous evening that he wanted to tend to, and that he might even inquire to Mr. Clyde Deeds. I made a move to accompany him, but he would have none of it, stating that his efforts would be but contact work and did not require my always welcome assistance. I turned my hand to my case history again, but could make little progress. There was the guilty thought that my friend was braving the elements while I remained cosy and warm within. But I forced myself to brand this as fruitless castigation. The number of Holmes's available contacts regarding all sorts of information was enormous. It seemed reasonable that some of them would speak to him more freely without his biographer in attendance. At loose ends I returned to my word squares. Holmes returned in the late afternoon. As he shook moisture from his coat, I busied myself with the Tantalus and Gasogene, and we sat before the fire and clinked glasses. A friend at the British Museum did not prove informative, old fellow, though when I described the gold dagger something struck him. I was able to draw for him that scroll-like design on its blade, and he identified it as a cartouche. My eyebrows elevated. Holmes continued, a seal of a royal personage. Now to deeds. With your frugal sense, Watson, you might be happy to learn that Clyde Deeds of Surrey is solvent and runs a most respectable business. Moved to that area around 5 years ago. Father was a recluse and died shortly thereafter. But here's the puzzle. Prior to their arrival at Macewood, nothing is known of Deeds, pay or fields. Complete dead end as regards to family history and origin. Rather singular, but then not all our clients date back to the Norman Conquest. In other words, I began, in other words, I discovered very little and got rather wet doing it. Your expertise with the decanter is of medical assistance. Now tell me of your day. My dead end is a six-letter space in the word blocks, I said, reaching for the paper. State of unrest reversed. As Holmes's eyes narrowed, I added, third letter might be T. Try CITCEH, which is hectic, reversed. I reached for my pencil with some excitement. This might open up a number of things. Associate in 10 letters, third letter C if CITCEH is right. Surely easy for you, Watson. Accomplice. It fits. Drainage in 5, second letter being I. Ditch. Watson. I overrode him. Discordant in 9, third letter C. Cacophony. My dear chap. Uncanny in 5, second letter E. Eerie. Holmes, you've done it. I believe I can. My voice dwindled away as I found my friend regarding me with a strange look akin to wonderment. Watson, I've been trying to mention that there is an amazing quality about you. Intuitive, perhaps, or just the ability to say the right thing at the right time. You are a treasure indeed. Since his remark struck me dumb, I could but regard him with a slack jaw. The wonderment faded from his eyes, to be replaced with that far-away look, a sure sign that his massive intellect was working in high gear. Hectic was the word, but the instruction reverse suggested a key. Our client's name is Dietz. Not a common name, but nothing unusual either. Uninteresting might be the best description, but reverse it and you have Steed, which opens up fascinating possibilities. Holmes was on his feet, making a beeline for the bookcase, from which he extracted the S-file. There was a tight smile on his face as he leafed through pages. Sansby the prisoner. Interesting case that. Slugar, the Serbian strangler, never convicted. Sloppy police work there. Ah, here we are. Maurice Steed Spaulding, British Army, retired. I'll try to dredge through the chaff. Graduated Richmond. Army, you say? I burst out with a sudden remembrance. Captain Spaulding, the African explorer, leading expert on Egypt. Hmm. Oh, was he an Egyptologist? Don't know why I associated the chap with Africa. Holmes's face rose from the file briefly. My dear Watson, Egypt is in Africa. Oh, so it is. Momentarily nonplussed, I watched Holmes's eyes race through a page before turning to another. Wasn't mixed up with that Piazzi Smythe chap, was he? You recall the theory of the Pyramid H and the Great Pyramid. Piazzi Smyth was a pyramidologist, Watson, and the theory of the Pyramid Inch was disproved. Steed Spalding was a student of cultures and of religions as well, wrote two books on the latter, The Coptics of Egypt and Islam Comes to Egypt, both considered monumental, though the last one did receive adverse criticism. He traced the rise of Mohammedanism in Egypt, beginning with the Arab invasion of 638, and laid emphasis on the tolerance of the Islamics towards Jews and Christians, as opposed to the attitude of Christianity during that period. His eyes rose from the book, sparkling with interest. It's becoming crystal clear, Watson. Spaulding took the first half of the hyphenated name, reversed it, and used it on coming to Surrey. I say, Holmes, is this not wild conjecture? Conjecture, yes, but not so wild. Spaulding was brought to my attention. Let's see, I have a note on that. He regarded the file again and then snapped it shut. It was June of '94. Sir Randolph Rapp. expressed some puzzlement regarding the gentleman, and I did a little investigation for him. Spaulding's expedition to Abydos in Upper Egypt and his first expedition into the Sudan were considered the coups of his time. He was involved in a second trip to Sudan that he abandoned halfway, and he returned to England and took up the racing of dogs in Stoke Newington. There was, in '90, an attempted robbery of his estate. The matter was hushed up, but I'll wager that is when our client's cigarette case saved his life. Following the robbery, Spaulding sold out and dropped from sight. 5 years back that was, and you will note that the deeds arrived in Surrey at that time. It fits, I'll give you that, I admitted. Another thought crossed my mind. If Rapp brought up the matter of the explorer and author in '94, that must have been right after your visit to the Khalifa at Khartoum. I had always been tantalized by the real reason for Holmes's journey to Mecca, and then to the Sudan, but he brushed aside my bait quickly. Sir Randolph Rapp was very interested in Captain Spaulding, as I am right now. It's the matter of the sacred sword, you see. I sighed. Please, Holmes, can we run that last bit over again? My friend smiled, replaced the S file in the bookshelf, and took his pipe from the mantel. In the folklore of Arabia, it is said that the sword of the Prophet Muhammad still exists, secreted away in some subterranean crypt in an unknown oasis. The unsheathing of the sacred sword is to signal the rising of the followers of the Crescent, who are then to drive the infidels into the sea. A holy war, I exclaimed, in keeping with what Mycroft fears. But what has the late Captain Spaulding to do with that? You know that Rapp, in his line of work, picks up a lot of rumors and is a great believer that myths and folktales have a basis in fact. Somehow he caught wind of the whisper that an Arabian chieftain feared that the sacred sword would be used as a device to lead his people to annihilation, a bloodbath. He supposedly gave this sword to Captain Spaulding, considered a true friend of the Islamics, despite the fact that he was Christian. Spaulding was to remove the weapon to England until such time as it could be returned without being an instrument to incite and inflame. I was shaking my head and should have known better. That sounds a bit far-fetched, Holmes. A moment. The attempted robbery at the Spauldings' dwelling in Stoke Newington may have been an attempt to secure the sword entrusted to the captain. Whatever, it got their wind up and they changed their residence post-haste, and their name as well. Holmes puffed on his pipe furiously for a moment. We can dissect the matter piecemeal, old chap, but we are rather flogging a dead horse. The recent intruder at the Spauldings' home in Surrey was not a thief to my mind, at all. To use the language of the Halfpenny Dreadfuls, he was casing the joint, attempting to find out where the sword was hidden, I said suddenly. Now you're on the track. Holmes's voice held a tone of approval. Consider Deeds's knee, Spaulding's reaction. He knew what the intruder was doing there. Though nothing was taken, he still enlisted our aid in hopes of finding out how to forestall a future attempt. He might well have called in the police, but I think the prospect of Scotland Yard on the scene rattled him. Suppose they located the hiding place of the sword. I was being drawn to Holmes's idea, in spite of myself, and tried to use the logic that he had made famous. All right, let us say that your brother's fear of an uprising is well founded. We have proof by virtue of the dead Cruthers that a tomb could well play a part. The dagger he brought is tangible. I can see it, and his dying words certainly tie in the Chu San Fu to the matter. Who else has the resources and the overbearing ego to involve himself in such a wild scheme? But where does that leave this sacred sword idea? We have been introduced to two situations, but do not place them in opposition to each other, old boy. They both face towards the Mideast, specifically Egypt. Let us consider them with an intellectual togetherness. You feel the sword is part of Chu's plot? Holmes was knocking out his pipe on the stones of the fireplace. The wily old dog is a bit of a showman, you know. With the sacred sword he might well set himself up as a latter-day prophet, a leader of Islamics throughout the world. But Holmes, it is just an inanimate object. What makes sense or follows the laws of logic is not always important, Watson. It is what people believe. I can see the idea of a horde of nomadic horsemen surging forth from the desert, and elsewhere, finds no fertile soil in your mind. But they came before, you know, not just under the Mahdi. At one time they flooded into France. The Battle of Tours. More recently, the history of Europe for a half a century was dictated by the alarming thought that the Grand Army of the Republic might rise again. The shadow of "le petit corporal" had our statesmen quivering even after Waterloo and his subsequent death on St. Helena. Presumably, we live in an age of enlightenment, but should you turn up with a sword named Excalibur and prove that it was the weapon of the great Arthur legend, I imagine you could stir up quite an uprising, certainly among the superstitious and clannish Cornish, and others as well. The thought of my waving a great two-handed blade and leading a horde to conquest and pillage had to introduce the dwarf of derision to my manner, with the midget of mischievous merriment trotting on his heels. The latter increased in stature as the chuckle on my lips grew into a chortle, and then blossomed into a full guffaw. It was so ridiculous, but then the truth of Holmes's words regarding the Corsican shouldered my laughter aside. As my face sobered and grim lines appeared, Holmes surveyed me with his wise eyes. "Now, I believe I shall ring for Mrs. Hudson and request two dinners. Tomorrow may be an important day in our lives." I could but agree. Men can be stirred to the marrow when deep-seated loyalties or hostilities are aroused. Holmes had once discoursed at length on the matter of racial memory. I had not followed him at the time, but it was making more sense now. It was during our evening repast that the first messages arrived. Holmes quite rightly assumed that they were in response to his cables of the night before, and relegated them to the desk until we had enjoyed an after-dinner cigar together. Then, with a sigh, he seated himself to go over the communications. The acquiring of information through the knowledge or efforts of others was onerous to Holmes. In the early days it was standard procedure for us to be on the scene of the crime in jig time, and make our own conclusions, or rather have Holmes make his. But now the scope of the sleuth's activities had widened, and it would have been impractical indeed not to take advantage of the far-flung web of contacts and sources that he had taken such pains to weave. I was in the dark as to what progress, if any, was being made. Possibly the messages were confirmations of a time and meeting place with some associate, or perhaps an answer to a direct question posed by Holmes to a highly qualified source. I was mentally framing a query that might prompt a revealing remark from him, when there was a gentle tap on the door. "Come in, Billy," said Holmes. The page boy did so, but there was no cable or envelope in his hand. "It's a box, Mr. Holmes. Two delivery men brung it." "It's for Mr. Mycroft Holmes, sir, care of Mr. Sherlock Holmes, this address." Now that's strange. Mycroft made no mention of this, and surely he has any number of working addresses. Well, best we have a look at it. "Rather big, sir." "Oh," said Holmes, springing to his feet. "Come, Watson, and let us see what object comes to Mycroft via our dwelling." Within the front door was a crate easily 5 feet long by 3 feet width. I glanced at Holmes blankly and drew a responsive shrug. Holmes positioned himself at one end of the box, and with Billy's help I lifted the other end, and we maneuvered it up the stairs and into our sitting room. Happily it was not of a great width, and we had it lying adjacent to the fireplace in short order. As Billy departed from the room, my friend was surveying the unexpected object with curiosity, which was heightened by the fact that one of the slats of the packing case was obviously loose. For a moment Holmes waged an inner struggle and then lost it, crossing to secure the clasped knife, though this time he made sure his unanswered correspondence remained neatly stacked on the mantel. "See here, the object is earmarked for your brother," I protested. "Agreed, but Mycroft would not deny us a peek, old chap." Holmes had the loose piece of wood pried up before I could muster another objection, and by then it was too late. The knife's stout blade was working out the thin nails that secured the crate, and I blushed to admit I was helping Holmes, for I too had caught the flash of gold in the light of the fireplace. What was revealed was certainly unusual. It was the size of a small steamer trunk, but glistened with a color unknown to commercial luggage. It was rectangular, and its sides were adorned with figures and objects that were strange to me. Finally, an obvious thought forced itself upon me. Holmes, if this is of gold, how did we lift it so easily? My friend tapped the top of the box with his knuckles. "Made of wood, I'd say, Watson, and overlaid with sheet gold. A backing of plaster, perhaps." He had his pocket glass in hand now. "The ornamental work marks its origin. Egyptian, without a doubt. Note the figures, male and female. The males seem to wear a kilt type of skirt, with the navels showing in each case," replied Holmes. "I believe that is a mark of a certain period in Egyptian art, but don't recall which one. See the plethora of signs, cobras, birds, and this one, resembling our infinity sign in the life symbol of the Egyptians. Whatever do you suppose is inside?" "That tantalizing thought must remain unanswered, old fellow, for we seem denied even a brief look-see." The slute's index finger indicated silver bolts that slid through gold staples, and were secured firmly by small and strange-looking locks. Evidently the top of this shiny box opened in the middle, like a miniature double door. The greater mystery is why this object is here. There is no error, for it is plainly addressed to 221B Baker Street. Holmes stood by the mantel for a moment, his broad brow furrowed in thought, and then either he reached a decision or some new idea came to his superb mind. "Well, I can draw no meaning from the ornamentation save that it reflects court scenes. Egypt must remain Mycroft's specialty until we learn more, and as to the contents, we can do naught but guess. Here, Watson, let's stretch this Afghan over the container, for the hour grows late." Automatically I helped Holmes cover the box, though his reason for doing this escaped me completely. Once the object was under the Afghan that my friend took from our couch, a rapid gesture of warning put me on the alert. All was not as it seemed. Let's see, said Holmes calmly. I'd best get these messages out of the way. He was at the desk fiddling with papers, but only with one hand. The other was signaling towards my medical bag by the cane rack, and I made for it with alacrity, bringing it to Holmes at the desk. He kept up a desultory flow of conversation, like a man preparing to retire for the night, all the while removing my stethoscope. "Stir up the fire, will you, good fellow?" he suggested, affixing the instrument to his head. I had a poker in my hand in a moment and stirred up the logs, noting that Holmes tiptoed to the covered object and applied the stethoscope to its cover. I took pains at this point not to make undue noise, and after a moment Holmes seemed satisfied and removed himself to the desk area, where he restored my indispensable medical aid to its resting place. "Well, Watson, shall we turn in?" "I'm for it," I said rather loudly, and my accompanying yawn was authentic and not dumb show. Without further ado, Holmes extinguished the lights, but now I understood his suggestion regarding the fire, since the flames still provided illumination in the room. Following Holmes's lead, I went towards the back stairs. My friend carefully left the door ajar when we progressed up the steps, making a bit more noise than necessary in doing so. Before we reached the landing, Holmes had one of my arms in his steady grasp, and his lips were close to my ear. "Get your handgun, old fellow, and tiptoe back down this way. Position yourself by the door, and watch that box like a hawk. There's something in there, Watson, something alive. I'll duck round by the front stairs to the entrance door, which is not locked. When you spot it opening, you'll know I'm in place, and we'll have whatever is in that Trojan horse bottled up." Like a dark shadow Holmes was gone, and my heart was pounding as I made all speed to secure the Webley from my bedroom, and inch my way back down the stairs to my station. Somehow the thought of a great anaconda snake slithering out of the strange box kept coming to my mind, and I was in a bit of a blue funk when I took position by the half-open door and peered into our sitting room. The box, with its cover, was plainly visible in the dancing light of the fireplace. I reasoned that the Afghan was a device of Holmes's, in case there was a peephole through which a human eye could have observed us. The thought of something human helped my nervous state, until I began to wonder what form of mankind could be secreted in such a small area. It was then I noted that our front door was silently opening. Its well-oiled hinges made no protest, for which I was grateful, and then its movement ceased. Now for the waiting. Whatever had entered our quarters in such an outer manner must have been patient, for at least a half-hour went by and my bones were aching, desirous of a change of position, which I was able to effect silently several times. Then there was a stir. and the Afghan box began to rise and then slide down, revealing the golden box. The entire top was rising, and I immediately realized that the bolts had been to create an illusion that the top was actually secured from the inside. There was a lengthy pause, and then I could dimly discern two small, dark hands that lifted the top of the box. A figure rose from the interior and gently placed the lid on the floor. It was with difficulty that I suppressed an exclamation. The black hair of this almost doll-like figure hung in two braids down the back of an oversized head that seemed wizened and not young at all, as its size at first had suggested. He hopped out of the golden box agilely, landing silently with bare feet on our carpet. A flicker of the firelight revealed broad lips that were skinned back, exposing small teeth filed to a point. There was such an evil menace about the face that I shuddered. It looked like a coconut shell with features painted on it in the manner of primitive art among the aborigines of the South Pacific. But the filed teeth were shockingly real and lent a death's head quality to this bizarre apparition. A loincloth and a child-size rough shirt was its costume. Standing on the door, it seemed no more than 4 feet in height. Small eyes, which were flecked with yellow, searched the room, and I was careful to remain frozen at my vantage point. Finally the figure moved, or rather glided with the grace of a wild animal, and I was reminded of the quick but fluid motion of a weasel. The creature gave scant attention to the furnishings, once convinced that the room was empty, but surprised me by crossing to the bay window and, after some effort, succeeded in opening it. I could not fathom what this strange form of humanity was up to, and was further bemused when it returned to the center of the room, peering at the bookshelf with a nervous glance. Then it clambered onto the chair to survey the desk top, and evidently found the object of its search. The ornamental dagger that Cruthers had brought with him was plainly visible, and a tiny hand scooped it up. I thought the figure would hop down from the chair, but primitive curiosity took over and the blade was drawn from the scabbard and tested on the tongue of the creature. Then the dagger was returned to its sheath, and the figure did descend to the floor as the front door swung open and the beam of a bull's eye lantern fixed the native in its light. There was a high-pitched tinny sound from the small throat, and, dropping the Egyptian dagger, the creature shot across the room and, without pause, dove through the bay window. I was in the room myself now, and as I ignited one of the lamps, I heard the sound of a horse suddenly in the outer darkness. There was the lash of a whip and the hoof sounds accelerated, and there was the rumble of wheels. Holmes by the window was peering out, but in a moment his face turned to me with a woebegone expression. "I've been had, Watson, outwitted, and by a pygmy no less." "But, Holmes," I sputtered, "what happened?" "I should have known when the little devil opened the window. We had him cornered, but he sailed out of the window and into a wagon load of hay, which is how he intended to leave our quarters, even had he not been discovered. The hay wagon is 4 blocks away by now, and we shall never find it. Our little friend has made a clean getaway, but he didn't take what he was after. We can console ourselves with that. He was after the dagger, of course. Why? Possibly that cartouche reveals something of its point of origin. Evidently, Chu San Fu doesn't want the ancient blade in our possession. Ah, then this pygmy was sent by the Chinaman. You know Chu's methods, Watson. He employs dacoits, lascars, and other unusual types with strange aptitudes. I'll give him credit for a most ingenious scheme of gaining entry here. Holmes was closing the bay window as he spoke. Fortunately, there was not enough sound to rouse the household, but best we not mention a barefooted pygmy to Mrs. Hudson, for she might not sleep soundly for a week. This remark brought an alarming thought into focus in my mind. If the pygmy is one of Chu San Fu's bizarre entourage, then the Oriental must know of your involvement. It would seem so, Watson. I'll have the golden box taken to Mycroft tomorrow. Possibly it will be informative to him, though I doubt it. Just a device to get the little devil in here. Locking the front door, he made for the bedroom stairs again. I'll also have the house watched during our absence. Then tomorrow is it off to Surrey? Why not? We may pick up the trail of the insidious Chu San Fu quicker there than here in London. A moment, Holmes. This chap, Dietz or Spaulding, for the time let us refer to him by his assumed name, Dietz. Very good. But I don't recall his giving you directions. Macewood, the name of his residence, was enough, my good Watson. And on this puzzling note, Holmes retired to his bedroom. With my lights extinguished for the night, a myriad of thoughts tried to march down the corridors of my mind. Long experience with the affairs of Sherlock Holmes allowed me to erect roadblocks, and sleep was not long in coming. However, it was invaded by filmy figures spawned from the imagination. Wild horsemen thundered over an endless sea of sand with pyramid shapes in the background, sharply defined by a blazing sun. Each nomad had sharply filed teeth, and was swinging a huge, curved, scimitar-shaped weapon. Heads will roll, I thought, before sinking into total oblivion.